Chapter 1. Hope. Quote, "Men can live about 40 days without food, about 3 days without water, about 8 minutes without air, but only for about 1 second without hope." End quote. Hal Lindsey. Without hope, life loses its significance. 2 men were in a POW camp. One of the men had the hope of seeing his family again, which helped him to endure the mentally and physically harsh conditions of life in prison. The other man's family had been killed in the war that was ravaging their homeland. To this man, there was nothing to live for. He had lost all hope. Giving up, he wasted away until he succumbed to death a few years after his arrival. In comparison, the man who had family waiting for him focused on the hope of seeing them again. He stayed strong and endured the very harsh conditions year after year until he was finally released as a free man. Hope has the ability to encourage us beyond what our circumstances dictate. Hope always believes there is a light at the end of the tunnel. Of the 2 POWs, the man without hope became disoriented in the darkness of despair, which ultimately led to his death. But the other man, the one focused on being reunited with his family, pulled through. Just as I once did, many today have a poor understanding of the importance of hope to give significance and value to our lives. How hope was introduced into my life. In my early 20s, all that I saw was all that I knew. It seems I was always destined to be a mechanic, and I had no problem with this, for I liked working on mechanical things. My life seemed to be all planned out. Complete my apprenticeship, obtain my mechanic's license, work on cars for the rest of my life, and at some point, move out of my parents' house and find a girlfriend. I would be living the dream. Hope is a feeling of expectation and desire for a particular thing to happen. I didn't have to hope for anything, for everything I thought was going to happen was happening. That changed after a car accident in the summer of 1978, and a few more brushes with death in the years to follow. During the late 1970s, information wasn't coming at us 24 hours a day. If you didn't watch the 6 o'clock news, you didn't know what was going on in the world. I didn't watch the news, and this narrowed my view on world affairs. It was as if I had a veil over my eyes, and that made me very self-centered. I don't know if it was the tunnel vision or being self-centered that made me feel that my life didn't have much context. But what I did find out in the years to come was that when your world becomes all about you, it becomes really small, and the smaller it gets, the more insignificant it becomes. The pre-accident. In the summer of 1978, I purchased a white, 2-door Canadian 1968 Volvo Amazon 122. It was my first car. It had very little power, but the stick shift made it fun to drive. The car was known to be a good rally car, and this was established by a Swedish rally driver named Tom Trana, winning the European Rally Championship in Monte Carlo in 1963. The legacy of this car prompted me to try my unofficial luck at rally driving on the back roads of the Bruce Peninsula while on a camping trip. But my rallying days were short-lived, however, when my friend Mark and I were going around a corner a little too fast. The car rolled over onto its right side, sliding on the loose gravel, and coming to an abrupt stop when the roof on the left side of the car just above my head hit a tree. Luckily, within a few moments, a pickup truck pulled up with a couple of guys who helped Mark and me roll it back onto its wheels. Once the car was upright, we were once again on our way, but definitely going slower than before. You could say that I was a little bit of an aggressive driver. My rule of thumb was that if your foot wasn't on the brake pedal, then you should be pressing the gas pedal hard against the floor. This driving style didn't work out too well for me later that summer. It caused a near-fatal accident, and that accident opened my eyes to the realization that my life didn't hold much significance to me. The accident. Mark, Olaf, and I were friends that grew up in the same neighborhood, went to the same public school, and could always be found hanging out together. I was 20 years old when our little group of 3 was reduced to 2 when Mark headed out west for a job in the early summer of 1978. By midsummer, Olaf and I were heading up to Algonquin Park in northern Ontario to camp for a few days. We headed out on a beautiful summer's day, and as we drove along with the sound of wind rushing through the opened windows, we felt that all was good. Cruising on a 2-lane highway just south of Bracebridge, we decided to stop for a washroom break on the side of the road. This is where my aggressive driving style got us into trouble. Since I didn't want to hold up the traffic behind us, I pulled off the road without slowing down. I had done this many times before without mishap, but this particular time, it didn't go so well. The Bracebridge County road crews had just finished redoing the shoulders of the road, and I missed a warning sign about the soft shoulders. At the speed I was traveling, as soon as the front right wheel hit the soft gravel, the car was immediately pulled down into the deep ditch until we hit an embankment made up of large boulders that bordered a driveway and were propelled into the air. Amazingly enough, the car came to rest on the driveway, upright, facing the road, and still running. As the car had spun through the air, though, I had been ejected out of the driver's window onto the rocks below. Olaf stayed in the car and sustained a few bruises. I, on the other hand, hit my head and broke my right collarbone and was taken away by ambulance to the hospital. That little Volvo was almost indestructible, but that was its last voyage. I'm not the kind of guy who looks back and makes more out of something than it was. But when you are thrown out of a car window while it's flying through the air, the probabilities of getting seriously hurt or dying are quite high. You would think that after cheating death and serious injury, Olaf and I would be glad to still be alive. But the very opposite occurred. After we got back home, Olaf and I talked about our adventure. Actually, it was mostly Olaf giving me crap for wrecking his vacation. I told him my opinion of the outcome was that at some level, it really sucked that I had survived. How could a young guy, in good health, who lived in a free country with a good job and family, be disappointed that he survived a car accident? Because without hope, life loses its significance. The only hope I had was in what I could see, and what I was seeing at 20 years old obviously wasn't enough for me to put much value on my life. I saw life as only a means to an end, and that end was being buried 6 feet underground. I didn't know it at the time, but life is a precious gift from God. I also wasn't aware that when you are lowered into the ground, eternity begins in either heaven or hell. When I came to understand that my significance in life came from God, everything changed. Thinking death is an escape from an insignificant life is the personification of hopelessness. For death without God wasn't going to bring peace to my soul. In fact, it's just the opposite. I can truly say that I am glad my life didn't end on that summer's day back in 1978, because a few years after the accident, I found God. He gave my life the significance I had been seeking. He also gave me the peace that my heart desired and the direction that I needed. It wasn't always a smooth road. There were a few mountains to climb and some dark valleys to endure. But never again did I feel that my life wasn't significant. The reasons I felt like I did before the accident never returned once I came to know God personally. For I had hope that no matter what life threw at me, I wouldn't have to go through any of it alone. God's promise was to be with me every step of the way, and God is incapable of breaking any of His promises. The hope that I have placed in God has been tested a few times over the years, but it has never failed me. The following pages contain my testimony of how God opened my eyes to the fact that I needed Him more than He needed me.